When U.S. Attorney General Pam Bondi took on a corrupt judge and a ruthless empire, she knew the price. But she never backed down. If you believe justice still means something in this country, this story is for you. Get ready, because what unfolds will leave you breathless. The air exploded before anyone could scream. A single gunshot cracked through the spring morning outside the Silver Ridge Federal Courthouse, silencing reporters mid-sentence and sending the crowd scattering like startled birds. Cameras jolted, capturing the chaos in jerky frames, as a second shot shattered the passenger side window of a black government SUV. Inside, U.S. Attorney General Pam Bondi shoved FBI agent Sarah Clean down beneath the dashboard, her voice low but urgent. "Stay down, they're not bluffing." From the shadows of the nearby stone courthouse steps, the shooter melted into the crowd, leaving behind nothing but panic and the sharp scent of burnt rubber. The scene turned into a battlefield. Sirens wailing, federal agents drawing weapons, reporters shouting into mics. But in the middle of it all, Bondi stood slowly, brushing glass from her sleeve with a stare like steel. Her eyes swept the rooftops, not afraid, but calculating. "This wasn't a scare tactic," she muttered, jaw set. "That was a warning shot. From him." She didn't say Jasper Vane's name. She didn't need to. Everyone knew who owned the bullets in this town. The cameras zoomed in as Bondi turned to the flashing lights and stunned onlookers. Her voice was clear, deliberate. "Let the country see it. The war's already begun." As agents secured the area, Bondi refused medical attention, choosing instead to pull a black folder from her briefcase, documents she had intended to deliver inside the courtroom that morning. Now, they were more than evidence. They were the reason someone tried to kill her. And for Bondi, that meant only one thing. She was finally close enough to the truth to make them scared. Very scared. But before we follow her inside the courtroom or inside the conspiracy that nearly got her killed, we need to go back to the moment it all began, to the courtroom where Pam Bondi didn't just break protocol, she declared war on corruption with 6 quiet words. "I don't stand for corrupt." This is the story of what followed, a story of courage, betrayal, and the cost of refusing to bow. Because in Silver Ridge, Colorado, justice wasn't just blind, it had been bought, and Bondi was here to take it back. 3 weeks earlier, the federal courtroom in Silver Ridge had felt less like a chamber of justice and more like a cathedral of intimidation. High ceilings loomed over rows of aging wood benches, packed with reporters, local officials, and a nervous public, all eyes fixed on the woman seated at the prosecution table, U.S. Attorney General Pam Bondi. Dressed in a crisp navy suit, her posture was unshaken, her stare fixed straight ahead. Across the room, Judge Elias Trask entered, his black robe flowing like a shroud as he approached the bench. The bailiff's voice rang out, "All rise," and the room obeyed. Everyone except one. Bondi remained seated, arms crossed, chin high. Her refusal struck like a slap in the face of tradition. Murmurs echoed instantly, a few gasps, one camera flash. Trask paused, eyes narrowing. "Ms. Bondi?" "The court has convened," he said, his voice dry but sharp. Still seated, she replied, calm as ever, "I don't stand for those who sell justice." The room snapped to silence. It wasn't grandstanding, it was a warning. She wasn't just here to prosecute Granite Dominion Ltd. for environmental destruction and corporate bribery. She was here to expose the rot that had crept into the bench itself. Rumors had long swirled that Judge Trask was shielding the mining empire from accountability, dismissing key evidence, stalling investigations, silencing victims behind closed doors. But no one had dared say it aloud. Until now, Trask's jaw clenched. "You are out of order," he snapped, pounding his gavel once. Bondi stood at last, her voice steady but cutting. "This whole courtroom is out of order, and I won't rise for a man who's helped bury the truth." Lawyers shifted uncomfortably. Reporters scribbled madly. The nation hadn't seen a moment like this in decades. An attorney general openly accusing a sitting judge of collusion, not in a press release, but in the Lion's Den itself. Outside, the networks broke in live. Inside, Judge Trask tried to regain control, threatening contempt. But Bondi didn't blink. She knew the price of silence, and she had come to Silver Ridge to break it. Her declaration wasn't just symbolic. It was the opening salvo in a war of integrity against an empire of deceit, and she had just drawn the first line in the sand. That day, justice didn't rise. It stood its ground. Long before Pam Bondi stepped into that courtroom, whispers about Granite Dominion LT Dominion had already begun echoing through the valleys of Colorado like a distant avalanche. On the surface, it was the crown jewel of Silver Ridge, providing jobs, funding schools, sponsoring parades. But beneath the glimmering sponsorship banners and community outreach programs, a much darker empire had taken root. Founded by Jasper Vane, a former geologist turned tycoon, Granite Dominion had expanded from a regional mining firm into a sprawling industrial powerhouse. But its success came with a trail of wreckage: tainted water, collapsed mine shafts, disappeared union reps, and dozens of environmental lawsuits that never made it past preliminary hearings. The company's secret? Control. Not just over land and minerals, but over the legal system itself. At the center of it all was Vane, a man as cold as the stone he mined. With silver-streaked hair and a voice like smooth granite, he was charming in public and ruthless behind closed doors. And when evidence started surfacing about illegal toxic waste dumping, labor abuses, and hush money paid to local officials, Bondi's office took notice. But the deeper they dug, the faster doors began to close, especially in the courtroom of Judge Elias Trask, whose rulings consistently favored Granite Dominion, often on dubious legal grounds. That's when Bondi brought in Sarah Clean, a seasoned FBI agent from the Environmental Crimes Division, who embedded quietly in Silver Ridge to trace the money trail. What Sarah uncovered was staggering. Over $7 million, 0 cents, funneled through offshore accounts linked to shell companies, bribes disguised as land deals, and most damning of all, a suspicious $500,000, 0 cents transferred to an account believed to be controlled by someone inside the federal judiciary. Though the account holder's name was masked, the timing of the payment matched Trask's dismissal of a major whistleblower case against Granite Dominion. It wasn't enough to make an arrest, but it was enough to raise the alarm. Bondi had seen these patterns before: the coordinated corruption, the silencing of truth through influence and intimidation. Only this time, it wasn't happening in the shadows. It was being conducted from the bench of a federal courtroom. Granite Dominion wasn't just a company, it was a fortress, and if Bondi was going to bring it down, she'd have to go after more than just the CEO. She'd have to bring the whole system into the light. The empire had hidden its crimes behind smiling commercials and handshake deals for too long. Now it had a target on its back. And Bondi had just loaded the first round. For Pam Bondi, this case wasn't just another file on her desk at the Department of Justice. It was a reckoning. Long before she stood defiant in front of Judge Trask or dodged bullets in the shadow of the Silver Ridge courthouse, she had spent years staring down the dark heart of American corruption, first as a prosecutor in Florida, then as the U.S. Attorney General. She'd seen what unchecked power did to families: drug overdoses tearing apart neighborhoods, environmental disasters erasing entire towns, politicians smiling for cameras while taking cash behind closed doors. But nothing hit her harder than the memory of a Florida mother clutching her overdosed son's photo outside a courtroom, tears streaming as a judge dismissed the case on technical grounds. That moment had stayed with Bondi, carved deep into her spine like stone. From that day on, she made a promise to never bow to the system when the system was broken. Her mission in Silver Ridge wasn't just about corporate accountability, it was about the soul of the justice system. Granite Dominion, with its army of lobbyists and legal shields, represented everything Bondi had sworn to dismantle: the illusion of respectability masking rot. A company so embedded in the political and judicial bloodstream that its crimes had become invisible. The deeper her team dug, the clearer it became. This wasn't a local case. This was a national infection, a blueprint for how modern empires subvert accountability. By a judge, by a senator, by the narrative. And when those things didn't work, silence the whistle or fire a warning shot. Bondi knew the personal cost. She had already faced smear campaigns, veiled threats, and now a literal attempt on her life. But she also knew that fear was the currency of the corrupt, and once you started spending it, you'd never stop. That's why she walked into Silver Ridge with her head held high, why she looked Trask in the eye and didn't stand. She wasn't there to perform respect for a system that had betrayed its purpose. She was there to reclaim it. And it wasn't just for the headlines or the history books. It was for the mother in Florida, for the poisoned children of mining towns, for the families who'd lost their homes, their loved ones, their belief that justice still meant something. Bondi's mission was simple: drag the truth into the light, no matter how much dirt it stirred. In a world where too many people had learned to look the other way, she had chosen to look straight into the fire and walk through it. Because for Pam Bondi, justice wasn't a title, it was a vow. It arrived without warning, no return address, no postage, just a plain white envelope jutting from the mail slot of Pam Bondi's modest townhouse on the outskirts of Silver Ridge. The day had barely ended, her briefcase still in hand from the courthouse confrontation with Judge Trask. At first glance it looked like junk mail, but prosecutors develop instincts, and hers screamed something was wrong. She paused, scanned the street. Empty, quiet. Too quiet. She retrieved the envelope carefully, noting the precise fold, the almost obsessive neatness of it. Inside, a single photograph and a note written in tight, scrawled penmanship: "Back off or disappear." The photo was worse. It showed Bondi stepping out of her car that very morning, and another, grainier image, her sister and niece on the schoolyard, unaware they were being watched. Bondi's fingers stiffened. Not from fear, she had received threats before, but this wasn't a gang member lashing out. This was calculated, personal, professional. The message was clear: you're being watched. We know who matters to you, and we're close. She called Sarah Cleany within minutes. By the time the FBI team arrived, Bondi was already sitting at her kitchen table, the note laid out like evidence. "This has Jasper Vane written all over it," Sarah said grimly, glancing at the images. "This is how he plays. Never direct, always psychological." But Bondi didn't flinch. Instead, she pulled a file from her briefcase, the one with the offshore accounts, Trask's suspicious rulings, and the whistleblower testimonies. She looked at Sarah and said flatly, "They're scared. That means we're close." For most people, the threat would be enough to reconsider, to step back or pause. But for Bondi, it confirmed she was exactly where she needed to be, inside the hornet's nest, stirring it. The attack wasn't meant to kill, it was meant to make her retreat. But Vane and his cronies had underestimated her resolve. She didn't fear shadows. She'd faced down cartels in Florida and buried friends taken by the opioid crisis. If Vane thought an envelope could shake her, he had no idea who he was dealing with. Bondi locked the door, double-checked the windows, and picked up her phone again, not to retreat, but to escalate. "Tell the team," she said to Sarah. "We're going full throttle. Start with Trask. Follow the money." The second hearing was supposed to be routine, a procedural step in the federal case against Granite Dominion Ltd., but the moment Pam Bondi entered the courtroom, it was clear something was different. The press gallery was packed tighter than usual, cameras already rolling. Judge Elias Trask sat taller in his chair, his robe freshly pressed, eyes narrowed like a man expecting a fight. At the prosecution table, Bondi placed her black briefcase on the desk with slow precision. She didn't look at Trask. She didn't need to. Today she hadn't come to argue legal points. She'd come to set fire to the mask. As Trask opened the session, his voice carried a thin edge of control. "Miss Bondi, we will not entertain any further theatrics or unsupported accusations." Bondi stood, her expression unreadable. "Understood, Your Honor," she said evenly. "But I believe this will speak for itself." She reached into her briefcase and pulled out a small silver USB drive. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. One of Trask's clerks visibly tensed. From the corner of the room, FBI agent Sarah Cleany stood silently, already moving toward the projector console. "Objection!" shouted Nolan Graves, Granite Dominion's chief counsel. "Your Honor, this is an ambush. This evidence wasn't submitted for discovery." Trask banged his gavel. "Ms. Bondi, this court will not tolerate grandstanding." "It's not grandstanding," Bondi cut in, her voice sharp but calm. "It's a recording of Jasper Vane arranging a payment, and of a voice, your voice, acknowledging the receipt of $500,000 to, and I quote, make sure the case doesn't go far." Silence collapsed over the courtroom like a thunderclap. Trask's face flushed red, then pale. "That's a fabrication," he hissed. "You'll be held in contempt for this." Sarah Clain inserted the drive. The audio filled the room with grainy but unmistakable clarity. Vane's voice, smug and measured. "That judge in Silver Ridge? He's ours." Then another voice, slower, gruffer. Trask's. "Understood. You'll get what you paid for." Pandemonium broke loose. Reporters scrambled for their devices. Spectators gasped. Granite Dominion's attorneys lunged toward the projector, but Sarah stepped in their way. Hand resting on her holstered sidearm, a quiet warning. Bondi stood at the center of the storm, completely still. Her eyes locked on Trask, who now looked like a man cornered in his own den. "Do you deny it now?" she asked, her voice cutting through the noise like a blade. Trask rose from the bench, shaking with rage. "You'll regret this, Miss Bondi. I will have you removed." "No," she replied coldly. "You're done shielding killers. You're not the law. You're the cover-up. And now the whole country knows it." With that, she turned to the gallery, to the flashing cameras, and said the words that would lead every broadcast that night. "The justice system doesn't need a robe to be sacred. It needs truth." The morning after the courtroom bombshell, the headlines hit like a wave, and not the one Pam Bondi expected. Instead of celebrating the exposure of Judge Trask's corruption, the nation woke up to a well-coordinated media blitz aimed directly at her character, not her case. "DOJ wrecking ball overreaches again," blared the Mountain Ledger, the most influential news outlet west of the Mississippi. "Attorney General or political showboat?" questioned a primetime anchor on National Focus tonight. Bondi's face, frozen mid-sentence from the courtroom footage, appeared in manipulated angles, surrounded by ominous music and out-of-context sound bites. It was a full-blown narrative war, and at the center of it stood Caroline Voss, CEO of the Mountain Ledger Network and longtime Granite Dominion ally. Within 24 hours, she'd assembled an army of pundits, influencers, and opinion columnists, each armed with the same talking points. Bondi was unstable, vindictive, and dangerous to the rule of law. In Silver Ridge diners and Denver union halls, the public reaction was split. Some older men shook their heads at the TV and muttered, "She's gone too far." Others, veterans of failed lawsuits and corporate betrayals, clenched their fists in quiet support, remembering every time a judge like Trask had shut their case down. On social media, Bondi Unhinged trended for hours, driven by bot accounts and fake profiles tied to Vane's media team. Even Congress began to stir, with Senator Monroe Lang calling for a formal inquiry into the abuse of prosecutorial power. It was classic Vane strategy. If you can't stop the evidence, destroy the person who revealed it. But Bondi had seen this tactic before. In Florida, Big Pharma had tried the same smear when she prosecuted opioid giants. She hadn't folded then, and she wouldn't now. Watching the spin unfold from her DOJ office, she calmly turned off the television and said to Sarah Clain, "They're not trying to disprove the truth, they're trying to make it irrelevant." Sarah nodded, already compiling intel on the media links to Granite Dominion. Bondi's response wouldn't be loud, it would be strategic. Let them play the media game. She was building her next move in silence. Because for Bondi, this wasn't a PR war, it was a battle for the country's moral compass. And she was just getting started. The attempt on Pam Bondi's life wasn't just a warning, it was a declaration of war. The day after the media smear campaign reached its peak, Bondi was scheduled to return to court for a key filing against Granite Dominion. The courthouse steps were swarming with cameras and spectators, most still buzzing from the leaked audio that had detonated Judge Trask's reputation. As Bondi's black SUV pulled up to the curb, a sharp crack split the morning air. A single gunshot, precise and deliberate, striking the rear passenger window and sending a spiderweb of fractures across the glass. Before panic could set in, a second shot followed, slamming into the doorframe just inches from where Bondi was stepping out. She dropped instantly, dragging FBI agent Sarah Clean to cover behind the vehicle as chaos erupted. The shooter vanished into the milling crowd, leaving no shell casings, no fingerprints, just the lingering chill of intent. This wasn't random, it was professional, and it bore the same cold precision as the rest of Granite Dominion's methods. This wasn't a scare tactic, Bondi muttered to Sarah as they took cover. This was a contract. Within minutes, federal agents swarmed the area, but the gunman had already melted into the city. Eyewitnesses gave conflicting accounts. A man in a baseball cap, a woman with sunglasses, a black van. None of it stuck. Bondi didn't need confirmation. She already knew who was behind it. Jasper Vane had just escalated. Back at DOJ headquarters that afternoon, Bondi reviewed surveillance footage while Sarah traced traffic patterns and digital signals. This wasn't freelance, Sarah said grimly. This was coordinated. Possibly the foreman. Bondi nodded. She'd heard of him. Vane's shadow enforcer, a former mine foreman turned corporate hitman, known for cleaning up inconvenient messes with ruthless efficiency. Then we hit back, Bondi said, her voice sharp, but not with bullets, with indictments. That night, while talking heads argued over whether Bondi had invited the violence upon herself, she sat in her office going over financial records, building the next phase of her attack. They missed their shot, she told Sarah. Now it's our turn. Because if Vane thought a rifle would silence her, he didn't understand the woman he was dealing with. Pam Bondi didn't run from threats. She hunted them down. 2 days after the assassination attempt, the Department of Justice took a step rarely seen in modern American history. Pam Bondi, invoking emergency authority under federal code, formally suspended Judge Elias Trask from the bench on grounds of suspected corruption and obstruction of justice. The news hit the legal world like a sledgehammer. Cameras caught the moment live on the courthouse steps. Bondi, flanked by federal marshals and FBI agents, holding up a DOJ-stamped letter with Trask's name on it in bold print. "The integrity of our courts is not negotiable," she declared. "This judge has failed the people. He is hereby removed pending full investigation." Behind her, agents marched into the courthouse to secure Trask's chambers. Inside, Trask exploded. He ranted about political overreach, about separation of powers, about how Bondi had no right to challenge his authority, but his voice, once booming from the bench, now sounded desperate, almost pathetic. The footage of him being escorted out, red-faced and trembling, became the defining image of a system being pulled down brick by brick. Supporters of Bondi cheered, but not everyone was clapping. Within hours, Senator Monroe Lang, longtime defender of judicial independence and a known Granite Dominion ally, took to the Senate floor, slamming Bondi's actions as tyrannical. "This is not justice, it's a purge," he shouted. "One woman should not wield the power to unseat a judge without due process." Cable networks ran the clip on a loop, splitting screens between Bondi's calm press conference and Lang's fiery speech. His demand, a full congressional hearing into Bondi's conduct. Back at DOJ, Bondi watched the outrage unfold with cool detachment. "Of course they're screaming," she told Sarah Clean. "They thought their robes made them untouchable. Turns out the law still applies." Sarah handed her another document. New financial records tying Trask to a real estate deal bankrolled by Granite Dominion shell companies. More proof. More fuel. Bondi knew what was coming. The political counterattack wasn't just inevitable, it was already in motion. But she also knew the truth was her shield. She had followed the law, exposed corruption, and stood where others had cowered. Trask was the first domino. The judge had fallen, not because of politics, but because he betrayed his oath, and now the whole country had seen it. Congress could bark all it wanted. Bondi wasn't backing down, she was just getting started. The Marvel halls of the U.S. Capitol hadn't seen tension this thick in years. Pam Bondi walked into the congressional hearing room like a soldier entering enemy territory, composed, focused, and flanked by FBI agent Sarah Clean. The hearing was called in response to her suspension of Judge Trask, and the committee's true purpose was clear: discredit her before she could pull down more pillars of the establishment. At the center of the storm sat Senator Monroe Lang, his silver hair gleaming under the lights, his voice already sharp with disdain. "Miss Bondi," he began, practically spitting her title, "you've taken unprecedented steps. Without congressional approval, without judicial oversight. What gives you the right to override the Constitution for the sake of a personal vendetta?" Bondi didn't flinch. Dressed in her signature navy blue suit, she placed a slim black briefcase on the witness table and met Lang's stare without blinking. "I don't override the Constitution, Senator," she replied calmly. "I defend it when those sworn to uphold it use their robes as shields for criminal enterprise." Gasps rippled through the chamber. Lang smirked, sensing an opportunity to paint her as a reckless zealot. "You've turned the Department of Justice into your own political stage," he said. "This is not a courtroom. You're not in control here." Bondi's response was swift. She opened the briefcase, revealing a series of sealed folders and a single USB drive. "You're right, Senator, this isn't a courtroom, but I brought evidence anyway." She passed the USB to the committee clerk and leaned into her microphone. "On this drive is audio of Judge Trask accepting payment from Granite Dominion. But there's more. I also have financial records, whistleblower testimonies, and one more thing. Video of you, Senator Lang, in a closed-door meeting with Jasper Vane, discussing how to neutralize my investigation." The room exploded. Reporters jumped to their feet. Some committee members shouted objections, demanding a recess. Lang turned crimson, his voice rising an octave. "This is slander, fabricated by your office to cover your abuse of power." But Bondi remained steady, her voice slicing through the chaos. "You want to talk about abuse of power? Let's talk about the millions of dollars Granite Dominion funneled to political PACs tied to this committee. Let's talk about the real reason you called this hearing, not to protect the Constitution, but to protect yourselves." The chairman banged his gavel, but it was too late. The momentum had shifted. The video began to play. Grainy footage showed Lang shaking hands with Vane, the audio unmistakable. "She's too loud. If we pull her badge, this all goes away." The crowd gasped. Headlines were already writing themselves. Bondi leaned back in her chair, eyes calm but fierce. "You brought me here to shame me," she said, "but all you've done is give me a platform." As the hearing spiraled into chaos, Bondi's message rang, louder than ever. Justice doesn't belong to the powerful. It belongs to the people brave enough to fight for it. And that day, inside the Capitol, she wasn't just fighting, she was winning. What began as a divided nation watching a political firestorm slowly transformed into something far more powerful, a movement. In the days following Pam Bondi's explosive congressional testimony, the narrative began to shift, not in press rooms but in barbershops, diners, veterans halls, and union break rooms across the country. Older Americans, especially working-class men, who'd long felt abandoned by both corporations and the courts, started speaking up. They'd seen this kind of power play before: companies poisoning towns, judges playing dumb, politicians selling silence. But this time someone was finally punching back. Call-in radio shows lit up with ex-miners from Kentucky to Montana, their voices gruff but proud. Bondi's the first one who didn't blink. In small towns ravaged by industrial neglect, handmade signs appeared. "She stands, so we stand." Outside DOJ headquarters, the protests grew. They weren't coordinated by activists or parties, they were grassroots, born of raw frustration and long-buried anger. Veterans in ball caps, factory men in coveralls, truckers who drove cross-country to hold up signs reading "Justice has a name, Bondi." Meanwhile, independent journalists began picking up where the mainstream wouldn't. Investigative podcasts, YouTube channels, and Substack writers dug into the financial connections Bondi exposed, verifying the trail of bribes, offshore accounts, and closed-door meetings. And they found more senators who had dismissed environmental reform bills while taking money from Granite Dominion-backed PACs. Even the smear campaigns began to backfire. One viral clip showed a late-night host mocking Bondi's courtroom confrontation, only for the audience to go silent instead of laugh. comment sections filled with messages like, "She's risking her life, what are you risking?" The tone had changed. What once looked like a lone prosecutor picking a fight too big to win was now becoming a public reckoning. Pam Bondi hadn't just called out corruption, she'd ignited something. And as the country looked past the headlines and into the heart of her battle, more and more Americans, especially those who knew what it meant to work, to sacrifice, to be overlooked, chose a side. Not out of politics, but out of principle. And they weren't standing down, not now, not after seeing one woman take on the system and refuse to flinch. The courtroom was overflowing, the atmosphere thick with anticipation and resolve. For weeks, America had watched the storm unfold, judges exposed, senators shamed, bullets fired, and now the man at the center of it all, Jasper Vane, CEO of Granite Dominion Realty, sat in the defendant's chair in a charcoal suit that looked more like armor than clothing. His hawk-like eyes scanned the room, calculating, unshaken. But this time, he wasn't in control. This was no longer his courtroom. It was Pam Bondi's battlefield, and she had brought every weapon the truth could offer. The prosecution opened with force, playing the now infamous audio of Vane conspiring with Judge Trask. "You'll get what you paid for." Trask, disgraced and shackled in orange, had accepted a plea deal in exchange for full testimony. On the stand, his voice trembled as he detailed how Vane had funneled hundreds of thousands into a hidden account in exchange for quashing lawsuits and obstructing investigation. He owned the bench, Trask admitted, and he thought no one could stop him. Bondi watched from the front row, impassive. She'd spent years getting to this moment, not to bring down a company, but to rip the curtain off the system that protected it. One by one, the evidence mounted. Wire transfers to offshore accounts, internal Granite Dominion memos detailing payouts, and most damning, a DOJ surveillance video showing Vane calmly saying, "If Congress can't stop her, use other means. Make it hurt." Those 4 words hung in the courtroom like smoke. Vane's lawyer, Nolan Greaves, scrambled to paint the picture of a misunderstood executive, but the jury wasn't buying it. They weren't hearing a defense, they were hearing the language of power unchecked. And when Bondi was called to the stand, she didn't offer theatrics, she offered clarity. Calmly, firmly, she outlined the full scope of Vane's operation, how he'd poisoned water, bribed judges, bought politicians, and tried to kill her to keep it all quiet. "This isn't just about laws broken," she said. "It's about lives ruined, and a system nearly lost." As she stepped down, silence settled over the room, not out of uncertainty, but awe. Even the judge, a woman known for her no-nonsense demeanor, looked at Bondi with something close to reverence. The trial had stretched 4 days, but the verdict was swift. Jasper Vane, guilty on all counts. Life without parole. As the courtroom erupted in cheers, Vane turned to Bondi one last time, his voice low and bitter. "You won't rest easy." But she didn't flinch. She looked him dead in the eye and replied, "I don't rest until justice does." And as he was led away in chains, America saw something they hadn't seen in a long time. A corrupt empire, falling at the hands of someone who wouldn't back down. Not for politics, not for fear, not for anything. Jasper Vane's conviction sent shockwaves far beyond the courtroom. Within days, Granite Dominion Ltd. collapsed like a rigged scaffolding finally exposed to daylight. The FBI, armed with the evidence Bondi's team had gathered, launched coordinated raids across multiple states, seizing corporate assets, shuttering offices, and arresting dozens of senior executives, lawyers, and regional operatives who had helped build the empire of lies. The company's once proud logo, etched into construction sites, public buildings, and university auditoriums, was now a mark of disgrace. Public schools ripped down its sponsorship plaques. Political candidates previously backed by Granite Dominion rushed to return donations or issue half-hearted statements of deep concern. But the tide had turned. No apology would clean the stain. Caroline Voss, the media mogul who had led the smear campaign against Bondi, resigned in disgrace after internal documents revealed she had accepted over $3 million, 0 cents, in consulting fees from a Granite Dominion affiliate. Her network was hit with federal subpoenas, and its ratings plummeted, as viewers abandoned the orchestrated narrative. Even Senator Monroe Lang, who had led the charge to discredit Bondi, faced an ethics investigation as newly uncovered communications showed his office coordinating messaging with Vane's legal team. He disappeared from the spotlight, his once confident voice now silent. But amidst the collapse, something else rose: public trust. For the first time in years, people felt that someone in Washington had actually stood for them, not just spoken at them. The working-class men, who had rallied behind Bondi, coal miners, truck drivers, veterans, watched in vindication as headlines declared corruption empire falls and Bondi delivers justice. Her portrait, once plastered across hit pieces, now appeared on magazine covers next to bold letters, "Unbreakable." Inside the Department of Justice, Bondi didn't bask in victory. Instead, she gathered her team, thanked them, and pulled out a fresh file labeled the Western Lobby Network, a map of connections stretching beyond Granite Dominion, tracing money to energy firms, private contractors, and even other judges. Vane was the arm, she said. This is the backbone. The message was clear. The fight wasn't over, just the first battle won. And as the dust settled over the ruins of a corporate empire, one truth stood firm. Pam Bondi had not only broken the system's silence, she had made it scream. 3 days after the verdict and the collapse of Granite Dominion, Pam Bondi returned to her DOJ office in the early morning silence, hoping for a moment of stillness. But waiting on her desk was a small, unmarked envelope. No stamp, no return address, just her name printed neatly on the front. Her instincts kicked in before she even opened it. Inside, a single sheet of paper bore a chilling message. The mountain wasn't built by one man. No signature, no fingerprints, just a quiet reminder that the empire she had just brought down was only a part of something much larger. Alongside the note was a grainy photo, her standing on the Capitol steps the day of the congressional hearing, taken from a long distance. Another message: "We're still watching." She handed the envelope to Sarah Clean, who read it silently before muttering, "It's not over." Bondi nodded, but there was no fear in her eyes, only focus. "They've lost their shield," she said. "Now they're testing the walls." The note wasn't a threat of violence, it was a signal. A reminder from the remnants of Vane's network that other players still lurked in the dark. Power brokers, lobbyists, judges, who hadn't yet been named. Granite Dominion had been the face, but the machinery of corruption ran deeper, greased by decades of backdoor deals and silent complicity. Later that night, Bondi sat alone reviewing her next case file, the Western Lobby Network, a sprawling web of influence stretching across oil companies, defense contractors, and political operatives, many of whom had stayed quiet during the Vane trial, calculating their odds. Now their silence had cracked. Bondi understood what the message really meant. You hit harder than we expected, now we hit back in the shadows. But she wasn't intimidated. She was galvanized. She'd faced cartels, corrupt judges, and bullets. Notes didn't scare her, they just confirmed she was on the right path. She slipped the envelope into a drawer labeled "Active Threats" and picked up her pen. "We go again," she said quietly. Because Pam Bondi hadn't declared war for headlines, she had declared war for justice. And as long as the system still whispered to protect the powerful, she'd be the voice that shouted back, unshaken, unbought, and unwilling to stop. The story of Pam Bondi's battle against Granite Dominion and the corrupt web surrounding it is more than just a political or legal drama. It's a powerful reminder that truth, when armed with courage, can still bring down giants. Bondi didn't win because she was louder than her enemies. She won because she was willing to stand alone when others bowed, to speak out when silence was safer, and to fight with facts in a world drowning in spin. Her refusal to stand for a corrupt judge sparked a chain reaction, one that exposed how deep systemic rot had settled into the very institutions meant to protect justice. The lesson is clear: real change doesn't begin in press conferences or campaigns. It begins in moments of quiet defiance when someone refuses to play by corrupted rules. Even when the system fights back with lies, bullets, and public humiliation, perseverance and principle still matter. Bondi's story teaches us that justice isn't automatic. It's something you chase, protect, and demand. And if you do it relentlessly enough, the truth doesn't just survive, it wins. In an era of moral compromise, this story proves that character still counts, and courage is contagious.